Okay, so this is video T.1 2. So it's an accompanying video for the video in the New Mindscape series, which is on human operating systems. So I talked about the fact that we all have an operating system, that we kind of grow into, or we have an operating system that is implanted in us as we grow up and as we learn how to operate our bodies and how to operate in society. And I also talked about the need for a new operating system, that the current operating system of society is broken. So we need a new operating system. So here in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what is this idea, where does it come from, and what exactly do I mean here. And I should say, let me see here.
Sorry to interrupt. I just noticed that there's a kind of notification sound, maybe from your computer.
Yeah, something.
Maybe you need to turn on the do not disturb mode of the laptop.
I don't know how to do that.
Or maybe you can temporarily just quit the softwares that might produce the notification sound.
Oh, here, wait. Turn off now. Oh, there, I can turn them off. Okay. All right.
Okay.
I saw a place to turn off my notifications. Okay. All right. Okay. So, yeah. So actually, when I talk about an operating system, so I talked about a mental operating system or human operating system. Well, to be honest, I'm using it as a metaphor, and I looked it up and I thought about it this way. And I looked it up and then I saw that there's actually no systematic academic theorization of these concepts. So at this stage, academically, these are potential concepts. There's a few articles on human-robot interaction, which actually have the notion of mental operating system or human operating system, which is actually quite interesting. But it's not a concept that's been developed academically. So where you'll actually find the concept, and to be honest, I had just thought about this, and then I thought it was a really interesting metaphor to start thinking about how our minds are structured and how our relationships with the world and with society and with our body are structured. And it was only yesterday and earlier this morning that I started looking up, other than academic literature, I just started Googling the term. And then I saw that actually the term is widely used in some spaces, which is primarily among futurists who are thinking about how to create a sustainable human civilization. And so you'll find a lot of very interesting discussions of this notion of a human operating system on the internet, in various blogs and websites, and even some videos. And I haven't looked at all of them yet. But I think that largely it's pretty much in line with what I'm trying to say. So I think this is very interesting. And here I have a bunch of links, and we can put them as resources for the course, where you can read some different aspects, some different groups of people. And there's actually some quite interesting. Some people are trying to develop new operating systems through gaming, actually, through collective video games and things like that, but in which you're learning to cooperate to build a new world rather than just always fight against each other, and other ideas of sustainability and how to create good, healthy workplaces. So there's a lot of really interesting ideas in here. And a lot of actually some beginnings of theorization of what an operating system is, as far as a human being is concerned. So these are some interesting resources. But I'm going to talk right now about how I understand this term. And in a sense, why I use this term instead of some of the other terms that are more widely used in anthropology and sociology. And actually, I started thinking about using this term when I was talking about, or when I was thinking about different ontologies. And so actually in the previous video on the intellectual foundations of this course, I already talked about the ontological turn in anthropology. And what seemed interesting to me is, so an ontology, what is an ontology in an anthropological sense? An ontology is simply a set of ideas and also a set of practices, which is a set of ideas about what are the basic constituents of the world. What is the world made of? And what is the relationship between the different things that the world is made of? So that's an ontology. So for example, in a naturalist ontology, the world is made of physical objects, and human beings are different because human beings have subjectivity, which objects don't have. So that's an ontology. So you have humans with subjectivity who engage with inanimate, non-subjective beings. So that's one ontology. And another ontology is, for example, the ontology of Chinese cosmology, where there you have myriads of beings, all of which are made up of qi, right? And that there are different flows of energy or flows of qi between these different beings, depending on how these beings are constituted, how they are organized, and how the relationship between the beings is dynamically being played out. So this is a different ontology. And I was interested in the idea that you could switch from one ontology to another. So for example, if you could go to the gym and there you're really living in the naturalist ontology, building your muscles, and then you could be practicing Qigong or practicing Tai Chi Chuan or martial arts, and you're actually enacting the Chinese cosmology, the Chinese ontology. So actually we can switch from one ontology to another ontology. That's really, really interesting. And not only just switch in terms of ideas, but actually in your body. So literally you can embody a different ontology. You can move back and forth. And so that's kind of like if you switch operating systems. So you could have a computer and you could, and I actually used to have that. I had an Apple computer, but then I could switch to a Windows operating system when I needed. So that's really, at the beginning, I was thinking of an operating system kind of as a more, another way of talking about an ontology. But actually, then I realized it goes farther than that. Because an operating system, the idea of an operating system is it actually, it's a system for how you actually operate. So it's not just a set of ideas. It's actually something that is operationalizable, right? And it's an interface. So again, if we think of an operating system in a computer, we have the hardware, and then we have the operating system, and actually the operating system is the interface between me, the user, and the hardware. So the operating system is the interface between the computer and the rest of the world. And actually, well, when we talk about these ontologies or a human operating system, that's also we could say it's that way. We have our body, and there's the rest of the world out there, the different beings and bodies or objects in the outside world. And then we have an operating system, which is the interface between that, between our mind, between our body, and between the world or the objects, the things that exist in the world. So that's one idea that I like about an operating system. And then, culture, obviously in anthropology, we use the word culture, but culture is just very vague. And so actually that's why we use it less and less, because it just kind of seems to represent everything and you can't really get a grasp on culture. So some people in sociology, they talk about a cultural toolkit, but that's like, there's nothing systematic there. So then what about the system, the notion of a system in an operating system? That all these different elements, they're actually interconnected, and it's the interconnectedness of these different elements that create a system that can be operated, and that can be operated in a consistent fashion. So that's why I think an operating system is much more concrete, easier to grasp and understand than the notion of a culture. Right. And I mean, I don't use it as a synonym of culture, but so it's, in a sense, it's more specific than the notion of culture. And same as, we could talk about mental patterns, but mental patterns is something that's in the mind and only in the mind. It's how you think. But an operating system, it's not only it's not only a set of concepts that guides the operation of your mind, but it's also the way we operate, the relationship between our mind and the world and the physical world outside of us, and our mind and our body. So, again, this is an analogy from computers, right? So the Windows operating system or the Apple iOS operating system, it's actually not something that only operates the computer itself, but I, as a person, I relate to the computer differently because the operating system makes me undergo different procedures. I have to do different things with the computer. So the operating system it's not just a system of a set of ideas, but it actually also structures the relationship between yourself and other things or other people, other beings. So in a sense, it brings us closer to some ideas in science and technology studies, which is a socio-technical system. So any technical system is so we tend to see it in as a machine, but actually any technical system is always deeply embedded in society. So the way the technical system was designed by humans, the way that the technical system actually affects the way humans interact with the system and with the world. So an operating system is, a human operating system is closely related to this notion of a socio-technical system. Now, so these ideas of socio-technical system is becoming more widespread now because we literally spend much of our life, if not most of our life, interacting with technical systems, with computers and automated algorithms and all these technical systems. But actually, then these ideas can actually apply in any context. If I'm a hunter and I have a spear, I have an axe. Well, I have a relationship with that tool, and my relationship with that tool also influences or guides my relationship with trees, with animals, and things like that. So that is a socio-technical system. The relationship between myself, my spear, and the animal is a socio-technical system. And so my mind operates in a certain way in order to be able to handle the spear. And my mind needs to be trained in a certain way in order to be able to handle the spear. Now then the human operating system is also then the interface between the mind and the body, and the mind and society. Yeah. So a few other dimensions to the idea of a human operating system is that we have dominant and parallel operating systems. So a dominant operating system, well, actually, so all of us, as we go to school and we are trained in academic systems, and so we learn, the different components of the dominant operating system. So we need to know math, we need to count, we need to have a quantitative mindset. We need to know how to write. We need to have a certain kind of procedural thinking. We need to know how to sit properly at a desk. We need to know how to sit in rows. We need to know how to communicate in a certain type of language. So we learn all of these things. And basically, these things that we learn in the modern educational system, that is really the dominant operating system. And then there are different programs in that operating system. So whether you're doing accounting or whether you're doing engineering or whether you're doing medicine, these are different applications of the same operating system. And so then they have their unique components within those different systems, but all of them require the same basic way of counting, the same basic way of quantifying, the same basic way of communicating, the same basic way of relating to the material world, the same basic way of relating to other people. So this is a dominant operating system. But then we have parallel operating systems, which are kind of like operating systems on the margins, which are which we use in other parts of our life. So again, to use the example of Chinese medicine, so most people, so the Western medicine is part of the dominant operating system, but some people, they in other contexts, they enter another operating system, they enter another ontology. And at that point, their body is in another mode. Their mind and their body is in another mode. Or when they're in a religious community, engage in a religious practice. So in a sense, that's a parallel operating system. And you could switch in and out. You can switch into it and switch in and out of it. So we have a dominant operating system and parallel operating systems. And we can switch between them. And when we're talking about building a new operating system, we have to understand that the dominant operating system is kind of becoming more and more dysfunctional, but we have to get away from this idea that you need a revolution to blow up the dominant operating system. That doesn't work. That's bad. But rather what you need is in parallel is to build something that works better and better, and that can apply in more and more different types of contexts. So that gradually a certain parallel operating system is more and more, works better and better in more domains, and can help to operate more and more aspects of our life. So, we need a new operating system. So this is a really important, an important assumption in what I'm talking about here. I mean, I don't think we need to really argue this anymore. It seems to be very obvious. I mean, we all know, so we're in the Anthropocene, right? So now we're in a new geological era where human beings are actually influencing the literal physical nature of the planet Earth. So you can see traces of human activity in the physicality of planet Earth. So this is where we're at, and that the influence that we have on planet Earth at this stage is negative, right? It's destructive. And we know that, but it seems that we're incapable of doing anything about it. And that's because our operating system is the operating system that destroys the Earth and doesn't really, it's not programmed. The program doesn't allow to do anything else, right? Because that's not what it was programmed for. It was programmed to extract. It wasn't programmed to heal. It wasn't programmed to be sustainable. So that's the problem. So the operating system is lamentably defective and it's falling apart. And so we have whole societies that are falling apart, not only because of the environmental issues, but also the operating system actually divides and destroys societies. So societies are becoming more and more divided because of fatal flaws in the dominant operating system. So that's a whole big issue. We can talk about it later. But what are some of the fatal flaws? And so this is, again, why it's important to bring spirituality, the spiritual dimension. One of the fatal flaws is materialism. So the dominant operating system considers that the only thing that exists and the only thing that matters is material wealth, material resources, our materiality. That's the only thing that matters. And the accumulation of that is the only thing that matters. So this is one of the first flaws of the dominant operating system. And the other one is individualism, that everything should be focused on individual self-interest. So when you have a dominant operating system that is designed so that everybody is only pursuing their own individual self-interest, and they understand their individual self-interest primarily in terms of material wealth, well, then we have the world that we have. But then the other flaw in the dominant operating system is the dichotomies associated with that. Because then if I say that, well, then people are saying, yeah, but materialism, so what? You don't want to live in a material world? What, you're in favor of collectivism? So the dominant operating system also creates these dichotomies that aren't very helpful. That if you reject dogmatic materialism, oh, that means that you must be some spiritualist who only cares about the spiritual and doesn't care about the material world anymore. Or if you reject individualism, that means you must be some collectivist who only wants to suppress the individual. So the dominant operating system, and that's precisely an ontology here, it sees the world as being divided between only, two ways of seeing things. And if you're not this, you must be that. So if you're not a materialist, you must be some spiritualist, in your flights of mystical fantasy. If you're not an individualist, that means you must be an oppressive collectivist. So the dichotomy itself is what is really damaging here. It forces people to think in this dichotomy and then to make a choice between one or two elements of the dichotomy. That's where we're really at the structure of the operating system. So this is one of the fatal flaws of the dominant operating system. Okay, so then in this course, so I'm saying we've got to think about building a new operating system. We've got to learn how to build a new operating system. Now, here's where we reach the limits of this metaphor, and where I don't like the metaphor of the operating system. Because when you're talking about an operating system, it sounds like, well, you could just be a programmer and you just program it in your head, or program it with some machines and then click it, switch it on, and then it's going to work. But of course, with human beings, it is not an engineering project. You cannot simply think up an operating system and then plug it in, or inject it into someone and then flick it on. That's actually an ideology, okay? No. So this is not an engineering project. But what it means is, and within a vision of humanity as moving toward maturity, where precisely we do not simply impose or format people like a machine into a single operating system. So it means that we need to enter a process of learning, action, reflection on action, and consultation. So in a sense, the understanding of the operating system and the designing and the cultivation of the operating system is something that happens with people who are working together, working collectively, and working gradually, not designing something in the abstract and then implementing it like an engineer. So it's more of a process of collective growth and cultivation. Another aspect of building a new operating system is that it needs to incorporate the whole person. So in my video on body, mind, and spirit, I talk about how the dominant operating system focuses only on certain capacities of the mind, our rational capacities, and it actually does not. It weakens the body and it weakens the spirit. So in other words, those parts, our body and our spirit, don't really matter in the dominant operating system. You can have it, but whatever you want, as you wish. But what really matters is our rationality, and that's all that matters. So we need an operating system that it incorporates our whole person, everything about us, all our capacities, all our powers, the body, the mind, and the spirit. So this is, and incorporates them holistically. Second is whole society. So an operating system is not something just for an individual, it's social. And operating system, and so it needs to be able to bring in all of society, all of humanity has to have a place in it. So now we have a lot of operating systems. I mean, most of our dominant operating systems are based on a nation state. So they're based on one nation, extracting all of the capacities and resources of all the people within a certain nation state against other nation states. Or they're based on the domination of one group within a nation state, one economic group, one race, or so on. So this needs to be a whole of society operating system. So one that can incorporate that is inclusive of all of society. So then, what I'm going to be really looking at in this course, then, so another important dimension, right? It's not written on the slide here, but is a spiritual dimension, right? right, whole person. So that includes the spiritual dimension. And it needs to be, so here's when I look at the spiritual dimension, and then we look at different religious traditions. Well, some of the religious traditions, or in most religious traditions, you can look at it in two ways. One is a highly dualistic way. So it's us and them, the believer and non-believer. We find in religion and in actually in very intense forms of spirituality, we can find a very strong dualism. And so that is actually that kind of operating system is quite dangerous. But then there's, in all the religious traditions, we also find another way of looking at things, which I would call non-dualist, right? So it's when you really, it's oneness, right? It's different forms of different understandings of oneness. And so here, and I'll talk about this more later, but it's what I call relational non-dualism. So it's about how do you recognize the reality of difference in the world, the reality that I am different from others, and how do you recognize and fully accept that, fully accept radical difference, and at the same time transcend it, so that from radical difference we move to oneness. But the radical difference is something that is actually acknowledged, respected, and loved. So in a sense, it's an understanding of love. Love is based on difference, but then through love you have unity. So this is what I call relational non-dualism. And all of this is something that is rooted in experience and in community. So this is not something that's just one person thinking about a new operating system. So as I just showed in the slide, previous slide, there was actually many different groups with their websites and blogs, and there are different groups that are actually trying to do things to develop a new operating system for humanity. And I noticed that even though I had not previously studied them, that many of the elements there, maybe not all, but there's a lot of commonalities between what they're trying to do and what I'm proposing here. So there are many groups that are actually doing things. And so these ideas are coming out of their experience of action. It's not just an abstract philosophy. And there are many other people who don't even know the word new operating system, but they're definitely trying to do that. Whether it's in the field of ecology, in some of the new technologies, in the environmental movement, in different social movements, in different spiritual movements. There are more and more people who really realize that our operating system is broken down, and they're looking at how to do things differently, and how to do new things. And so this is an idea that grows out of experience. Now, for me, it grows out of my experience in the Baha'i faith. So this is a community which believes in the need for a new operating system, that humanity is in a transitional phase from its childhood to its maturity. And so we need to have a new way of doing things, a new way to understand our spirituality, our whole lives, a new way to live our lives in society. And we need to learn all of this together. And so hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people around the world, in Baha'i communities and with their friends all over the world, anywhere, in thousands of communities in all the different continents and countries, they're actually trying to develop a new operating system. And they're learning from each other, and they're sharing experiences, and they're growing in this process. And so what I'm working on, as I develop this course, a lot of the insights come from this experience, but they don't only come from this experience. And so this is what's also important, is that the new operating system needs to be something new, but it actually has to be rooted in the spiritual traditions of humanity. So you can't just cut off your roots. And the roots of human culture are religious roots. So we have to, what is the role of our indigenous cosmologies in a new operating system? What is the role of Chinese philosophy and Chinese cosmology in the new operating system? What is the role of the tradition of Abraham, the Jewish and Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition in the new operating system? These are the roots of our human civilization. So how do they grow and how do they transform in a new operating system? So in fact, it's all of the collective experience of humanity which needs to come into and in a sense be transformed and brought to a new level in a new operating system. And so the idea of a new operating system is something that is imagined, it's utopian, but it's also something that is rooted in experience. And I think this is very important. This is very important. Right. So that was on the new operating system. And then the next video is actually going to be on what do I mean when I'm talking about spirituality and mind, body, and spirit. So that's going to be the next video in this series. Thanks a lot.